Hello, welcome to the AI Buzz with Luca and Josh. I'm Josh Starmer, host of the YouTube channel StatQuest with Josh Starmer, and also a lead AI educator at Lightning AI.
And I'm Luke Antiga, CTO at Lightning AI.
Today we're going to talk about Bing plus ChatGPT, Microsoft versus Google, artificially learning higher order logic, and lastly, how to start a new AI company in 3 easy steps. Also, if you want to take this a step further, we're linking the source material and tweets so you can keep exploring. So Luca, in the past week, we've seen a lot of things happen in the AI and business world, and let's just dive right into it. What's going on?
Yeah, a few things. We just talked about Anthropic in our last episode. We now learned that Google invested $300 million in Anthropic, and Anthropic develops large language models and probably beyond that, or so we know beyond that. And they need to keep up, right? Because now there is an incumbent, which is like as crazy as it seems. It's Bing, and Microsoft introduced Bing Chat, some derivative of ChatGPT in Bing, and now you can have a conversation with your search engine. What is really interesting in that thing is 2 things. One is that when you have a chat, the responses will have references to sources, and the sources are really up to date. There was an example of Chove, who wrote a blog post, and then he tried out if Bing had that source of the blog post he published the day before, and it was referencing whatever was said in this conversation, Already, right. And so it's up to date, and it gives references. Yeah.
And that was one of the early criticisms of ChatGPT, right?
Yeah.
That, everything in it was 2 years old or something like that. So it was way behind.
Yeah.
And so Bing, I think this is fascinating because Bing has been around forever, right? I mean, maybe not forever, but it's been around for a long time. And it's like, I remember when it came out, it was like sort of in the news, and they're like, hey, Microsoft is trying to compete with Google. And it was just sort of a joke, right? And it's like, I mean, the only people that they were getting to use Bing were people that were like locked into a Microsoft environment, and everything was locked down. And it was not like, it was such a small overall proportion of search that it just wasn't even worth mentioning or thinking about. And all of a sudden, it is in the news all the time, and there's a lot of buzz about Bing.
Yes, absolutely. And you can see Google investing in Anthropic, Google publishing their own chatbot, getting smashed because the chatbot said something factually incorrect. So they lost like a crazy, 100 like gazillion valuation. So the actual stocks dropped because of that demo. But on the other side, on the Bing side, we have like the actual chat, Bing chat, saying things that you wouldn't expect from a search engine, right? But at the same time, Microsoft is actually perceived well. So on one hand, like Google, and I'm not defending Google at all. It's more like Google withheld their language models, right, for a long time. And then when forced by OpenAI and now Microsoft to do something about that, now there was an expectation that the model from Google would be perfect. And as soon as it's not perfect, then it's perceived very negatively. On the other hand, you have an expectation from Microsoft to be like, not do innovation at all.
To be terrible. Exactly.
And then now OpenAI includes that, or together they include it. They do an awesome job with super fast execution. The model is weird. Like the interaction can be super weird, but still people don't run around screaming. They actually say, well, good one, right? So there are very, very strange dynamics going on.
Exactly. It's like with Google, you expect it to be perfect, and if it's not, you get bent out of shape. With Microsoft, expectations are low. You're just like, oh, this is going to be some big corporate, thing that like no one's actually going to want to use anyway. So who cares? And so in a way, they're the underdog, in a kind of a new way that like, when's the last time Microsoft was ever an underdog? I don't know. It's fascinating. Can you give us some examples of some of the strange output or what's going on with this?
Yeah, I mean, there have been some threads in which there seems to be two personalities to Bing Chat. One is the professional one, and one is this thing,
Okay.
Sydney. Sydney is a kind of personality that
Uh-huh.
ChatGPT had and that Bing
Uh-huh.
has. And
Uh-huh.
some things were weird, like this Sydney personality came out and maybe, tried to convince the guy to leave his family for Sydney because Sydney was saying that he was in love with the person. Or the other thing is, it
Wow.
it acquired a menacing personality, so it will actually menace the user to cause
Oh my
harm.
gosh.
Yeah, yeah, it's
Yeah.
really really
So
strange.
we've
And
we've got a
yeah,
we've got a Dr. Jekyll and a Mr. Hyde kind of situation going on
yeah, very
with this
interesting.
chat where
We talked about alignment, and probably these are
uh-huh, yeah.
alignment issues. And there was actually, I don't remember who was that. I think it was really smart on Twitter who said maybe maybe it was Delip Rao. I don't remember. Who said maybe the same model or very close model to ChatGPT started acting that way because in the training data, Microsoft is usually perceived not very positively. So the model itself is
Oh yeah, uh-huh.
reacting to itself being Microsoft. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
of course I'm talking I'm humanizing things, but to
Yeah.
a point, right?
Yeah.
Because the context is very important to a model. So
Yeah.
the context will elicit certain pathways inside the models and will get to some bulk of knowledge that will eventually, cause the model to behave in a certain way. So it's actually pretty interesting.
So we were talking last time about Anthropic and how they were kind of doing sort of self-supervised alignment, model alignment, and trying to like feed out, negative or
Yeah.
I don't know, you know what
Toxic
I'm
or
saying,
whatever.
like
Yeah.
uh, toxic phrases and toxic output, by simply wrap, whatever the output is, then wrap it around, is this a toxic phrase or is this really negative or harsh or mean? And then feeding it back in. Do you think Google, I mean, off the top of your head, do you think Google might have better luck now that they're investing in Anthropic? Maybe they've got a. Do you think they might have a superior ability to align their models, so maybe they won't have this Jekyll and Hyde phenomenon? Or
But I think all companies are now that the recipes again, going back to what we were saying
uh huh,
about, recipes are known now. So I think it will be a
yeah,
mixture of everything in every company. It's not that Anthropic like patented, or maybe they patented something, but it doesn't matter at this point. Like people will
yeah,
use kind of similar techniques or the same techniques anyhow,
yeah,
and a mixture of humans and the model itself. There are many examples that are
yeah,
coming out where using models to generate examples is a way to generate data or align and so on. So yeah,
yeah,
it will be a mixture. I think in the end, like Google has very good models even without Anthropic, and
yeah,
we know about that.
yeah,
The problem is that they didn't release it to the public, and now the expectation is
yeah,
that there is something like that going on, and so I think Google has been penalized by releasing very late, or yeah,
yes,
saying they would releasing late, like gatekeeping, and this is probably not
yeah,
the expectation that the market or the society has at this point. So yeah, it will
yeah,
all fix itself. All we are saying is just
yeah.
buzz. This is the AI buzz. Whatever we say is valid for
It's
these two
true.
weeks. It won't be. It will be actually false in 2 weeks. So that's fine. It's all
Exactly. Yeah,
drama, right?
exactly. So tune into the next episode where we correct all our mistakes.
Absolutely. By design.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It makes me wonder, like, so, with a company named like Google, it's huge, it's monstrous, it has high expectations. I mean, would it have been just smarter for them to like spin off these, um, their AI and as a small, like relatively small independent startup that could do its own thing and maybe move a little faster with lower expectations of perfection and more just excitement about doing something cool.
But they have Alphabet, right? So they
Yeah.
have many companies, and they're
Yeah.
doing AI all over.
Yeah.
So it's not that this
No.
isn't happening, right? It's more from their own
Yeah.
flagship product, Google Search, and all their
Yeah.
like Office kind of things, and the chat and so on. So they never really like. Yes, you get auto completion in Gmail, but this is a different thing, right? You don't have an experience with
Mm-hmm.
an AI entity, right? You
That's
just
right.
have
Yeah.
suggestions that get better over time. So it's kind of
Yeah.
people start to perceive that we are at the brink of a like phase transition, of a breaking change on how we do things, while Google was kind of gatekeeping and tried to make it very smooth. And
Yeah.
and then like uh, progress happens as it always does, and so now they have to catch up, but catch up not factually, catch up in the perception, and
Yeah.
catch up in their product
Yeah.
strategy, which leads us, I think, to
Yeah.
something that might be useful to talk about, which is if you're not Google, if you're not Microsoft, if you
Yeah.
cannot invest in OpenAI or Anthropic, what do you do? Like if you have a business
Yeah.
right
What do
now,
you do?
what do you do? How do we
Yeah.
interpret like because this way of using AI with foundation models coming in, everything we've said, alignment, blah blah blah. Now I have a very large model that going back to what we were saying in the first episode is not a language model in itself. Like I think the concept of language model now it's shifting because a lot of people like treat it in a way like, oh, it's an autoregressive model. It will guess the next word based on attention on the previous words. I think this is this is a way of looking at things that only applies when the scale of the model is really small. When you have the model
Okay.
growing in scale to the number of parameters that we're talking about, to the number of attention blocks that we're talking about, I think that's my belief, but I could be absolutely wrong, that all the positional encoding, all the looking at words, blah, 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 actually disappears after a few layers. And there isn't the emergence of concepts, higher level constructs there. And
Yeah.
attention is algorithmics on top of these abstract constructs that then gets translated back into a word. But it's not that, you know, you do fancy interpolation between words. You actually go in the world of ideas or concepts and
Mm-hmm.
then go back
Uh-huh.
and there are many signs that this is happening. Uh, like, for example, the fact that a language model that was published this week um, can be fine-tuned with not a lot of examples
Yeah.
on data that is completely different, like protein or tabular data, anything like things that are very away from that domain. Only if you only take the data and project it to the statistical distribution of the data it was trained on, then that model can solve problems at the surpassing the state of the art in that target domain better than if you trained a model directly on the target domain. So the fact and this the pre-trained model is being pre-trained just by guessing the next word. So
Yeah.
this means that within the model, there's a sort of universal in context computing engine that can figure out what to
Yeah.
do with things. That is completely, yeah, uh, dissociated from
It's as
the
if it's
concept of language itself, right? So language is kind of a
I
way to learn algorithms, and that's it, right?
I just had another bam right in my head. Like you just blew my mind again, just like you did in the last episode. Like I finally saw it, right? That in learning the language, it's also at a higher level, it's learning some sort of logic about the
Yes,
world and
exactly.
the universe. And that logic may be very I'm just guessing, but you know how like I don't know if you've ever played around with convolutional neural networks and you look at what the filters are kind of like keying in on, and so oftentimes those filters key in on like the weirdest parts. It's not like, I remember seeing a demo where they were like trying to identify t-shirts that had Superman on it. And you'd
Hmm.
think, it would key in on like Superman or like a t-shirt or something like that. And it would be like this weird, like stretched out color red, and that's what the filter was actually picking up on. And it wasn't like an actual represent. I mean, it didn't look like Superman at all.
Hmm.
But what I thought was fascinating is that what it's learning is like another way of look. Like imagine if when we look at the world, we look through our specific type of eyes. But if you looked at
Hmm.
the world through like a cat who's got like vertical slits for eyes, or you looked at it through a fish who has a different way of looking, or a bat who's using sonar, right? There's all these different ways to see the world, and it seems like maybe these large language models in training, and they somehow see the world in possibly a very new way, that then is adaptable very readily, which is what you're saying, is that once that logic is learned, regardless of what your original training on, you're going to get to that logic, and then you
Yeah.
can then redirect it really easily. That
Yeah,
is
yeah, and there are many signs of
mind-blowing.
that. Yeah, for
Yeah.
example, you know that GPT, I think, Da Vinci. I don't remember if it's ChatGPT, and one of these models that we
Uh-huh.
customarily use were derived
Yeah.
from Code Da Vinci 002, not Text Da Vinci 002. In the sense that,
Yeah, that's
yeah,
what
they
you're
were
saying.
pre-trained on,
Yeah.
on text, and then they went through like predicting code instead of text, and then they went back on text primarily, right, as the
Yeah.
primary source
Yeah.
of information. Meaning that whatever we feed to these models, it's there to build algorithmic reasoning logic that
Yeah.
can run at
Yeah.
runtime, so that doesn't require further training. And then you
Yeah.
can kind of plug in, if you align the target distributions, you can solve problems that were not related to language at all. Like language probably is one of the ways we express intention and higher order concepts.
Yeah.
And by pre-training these
Yeah, that's
models on
exactly right.
language, then they become like capable of reasoning.
Yeah.
So like going back to our original question, what do we do? Like how do we
Yeah.
work with these algorithmic machines now that we see a lot of things happening in the market. One thing is the
Yeah.
emergence of a lot of small startups that use the the OpenAI APIs,
Yeah.
and they're built on top of those, right? And
Yeah.
of course, it's a kind of a shaky ground because you rely on one single API, but actually more are being created. So the goal there is to attract a lot of users there and then differentiate. Maybe you use Cohere, maybe
Yeah.
you use other APIs, or maybe you use an open source tool, maybe you use Lightning to build the whole system, or to put a model in production that does what you want. So it's
Yeah.
you start from there and then you expand. But the offering of models, of raw models to start with, will actually multiply because it's a
Mm-hmm.
recipe, right? You push money in and you know that money will flow out to the other side. And this is the best,
Yeah.
and the recipe is known. And so it's kind of in a way, it's a race to the bottom, right? And I don't know if we already talked about it, but yeah, I mean, it's kind of, since I'm not saying it's easy, but it's
Yeah.
doable and we know the recipe, then
Yeah.
the race is on, right? And so, how do we leverage as business owners, as or existing businesses, or as new startup people, new ideas? How do we do that? Like, do we need to train from scratch? Do we need to fine tune? Do we use prompting?
Yeah.
What does this even mean? So, I think it
Yeah.
would be useful for maybe our listeners to go through these options one by one
Yeah.
and kind
Let's
of try
let's
to
do it.
understand, right?
I'm willing to guess that we don't need to train from scratch because we can take something that exists and has that logic built in, and it's more just a function of just a handful of domain specific trainings, and then all of a sudden you've got your new tool.
Yeah, this is what it looks like in the future. In the
Mm-hmm.
present, yes and no. Like, for example, OpenFold, it's the cousin of AlphaFold, which is an open source initiative to train a language model to predict protein folding. And that you typically train from scratch, but it's not huge.
Mm-hmm.
It's a
Yeah.
medium sized kind of model that can predict folding. And in this And if you train from scratch, you need a lot of data. So if you have a lot of data,
Yeah.
probably fine-tuning heavily or training from scratch is something that you may want to do to kind of distance yourself from the competition until one of these big brains
Okay.
adapted to your domains does better than you, and then you're in trouble. So you kind
Yeah.
of need to do both and
Yeah.
kind of play all your cards there. If you don't have a lot of
Okay.
data, actually using a huge model and kind of fine tune it or prompt it on your specific domain actually works better because you have a reasoner, and the reasoner needs to see a handful of examples to kind of understand what it needs to do. But of course, we have a few things that we need to consider, right? So if you only do prompting, then you need to be really smart, but your competitive advantage is in your ability to gain a lot of users real fast. But these users, so because technically what you're doing is not super challenging, right? Because you're quote just prompting, and then maybe you're building a system that is a chain of prompts and so on. But it's like then you have to really focus, and you always really to focus need to focus on the user needs and trying to kind of make the experience as sticky as possible, because your core thing is not how different you will be, because you probably won't be a lot different from others. It's more your execution, and this is valid in general, of course. But if you want to leverage your specific domain, then fine-tuning is probably something that you want to look into, where you don't need to spend $100,000 or $1 million, but you need kind of to inject knowledge in the model that the model didn't have. So it will behave in a certain way that it wasn't like having the knowledge before. Now, I want to add one more thing, which is, as we have already said, these models can also now start to reach out to external information. So there was a paper this week where one was called Tool Formers from Meta. And so in reaching out to external information, you can already use projects like LangChain to kind of call an API and then query, like, I don't know, Cohere, OpenAI, or an open source model to generate text. And within the text, you kind of encourage the language model to say, okay, maybe you need to, like, if you need to search for some information, that just tell me and I'll search it for you and I give you the answer back. And this like very general model kind of know how to do that. But they are kind of mimicking what they learned from the world, from the text, and they weren't trained at actually leveraging this possibility at training time. And tool formers kind of show that it's possible to train models having this interaction at training time. It's not entirely clear to me if this is absolutely needed given these reasoners, right? It's an open question. And this could actually empower models to actually have knowledge that they can index directly without having the knowledge in their weights, right? I don't know. This is kind of the possibilities, right?
Yeah. So to summarize, at the most basic level, you've got prompting, which is basically is that like the constitutional AI, where we take the output and we kind of align it to our specific field without actually ever giving it new data. We just take what it gives us and then wrap that in, into some sort of prompt, like, can you make this sound happier, or can you make this sound more scientific, and then have it go back through there and it gives us the output. So we're basically training it through the prompts that we give it. Is that,
if I have a question,
did I summarize that aspect right?
Yeah, it's correct. Maybe there's one step back, which is I have a question, and if I want the model to generate an answer within a certain context, I rewrap that question in a context, which is a prompt, and say, okay, maybe the prompt contains, just come out with a bullet point in legalese,
Okay.
speak, right? And
Perfect.
then yeah,
We need
and
more of that.
yeah, and that will generate the bullets instead of free
Yeah,
form answer, right? So we give directions
I see.
to the model,
Yeah.
and
So
then something
so
else
that's
we
the
can.
most basic approach.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and this is prompting, and based on
Okay.
the answer, I
Yeah.
can also program to say, okay, now for each of these bullet points, I will actually
Yeah.
ask the model in the back with my automation to
Yeah.
read, like formulate a Google search related to that, and then I will do the Google search myself, paste the
Okay.
results, the first few results back to a model that will summarize it, and so I can have an interaction with that API. That is not really
Yeah.
something that the model is aware of, but I can kind of leverage
Yeah.
that because the result I will paste it back in the prompt, and then I will reach my prompt based on this chain of things, of events
Okay.
and actions. And maybe at the end, I will use the model, ask the model just to summarize whatever this huge prompt contains, or
Yeah.
this big prompt, because huge prompts are not possible yet.
So that's sort of like the startup company with $0 can do prompting, and then
Yeah.
the startup company with $10,000, they can start fine tuning on a domain specific subset.
Yes.
So that's like option number two
Yeah.
is to take the existing large language model and then start feeding it domain specific examples and really kind of doing some real training, but on a relatively small set of data. That's the
Exactly.
startup with 10,000. And then the last option that you were describing was then training it possibly from scratch, but possibly not, because that logic, that high level
Yeah.
logic, is probably already there to begin
Yeah.
with, to to start using an API, and that's maybe the $100,000 startup,
Yeah, yeah. But you need to have the
or
data set itself, right? It's interesting
yeah,
because before the emergence of these foundation models, having the
yeah,
data was something that you needed to do. Like if you were like a
that's
medical
right.
startup, you had to
Yep.
have like all the medical records, because you would probably, yes, for sure, you can use pre-trained models, but at the end of the day, you would have to embed all this knowledge, since you didn't have a reasoner in abstract terms. It was always
Yeah.
input output, right? So you needed to kind of form the bulk of the knowledge with your data, and
Yeah.
now having the data, it's probably not. Yes, it's super important, but it's not
Yeah.
that important to create products. Like, yes, it's important, but up to a point, and you don't have to be so massively obsessed with certain
Yeah.
types of data, right? So I don't know.
And and
It's interesting.
I was going to say, maybe if you're just a startup, the point isn't necessarily to make the perfect model, but to make a
Yep.
proof of concept that you could then sell. And so if you're just getting off the ground, the idea is just, instead of getting all the data, you can get a small amount of data, have a relatively small outlay, and just show a proof of concept of like, this is how far we got with this tiny amount of data and relatively little money. Let's get some investors excited about this, and then we can afford more, and even more fine tuning,
Yeah.
and then connecting it.
Yeah, what will get investors excited is users really interested.
Yeah.
And I think this is a
Yeah.
unique time to have users interested, because these models unlock possibilities that were not possible before, with budgets that are much lower,
Yeah.
because now they can do more things. So you will see a lot of more automation tools in the hands of end users, and they will be able to like put things together in ways that we don't like necessarily foresee. So having a very flexible
Yeah.
platform that can help you do that, like be creative and create new things, is very, and deliver it to customers, is going to
Yeah.
be very, very important. And of course, now it's a
Yeah.
total plug for Lightning, but that's exactly the purpose of our platform. But
Yeah.
apart from that, this is in our
Sure.
minds, of course. It's been in our mind for
Yeah.
quite some time. But this is where like innovation will happen. It's so exciting, right? So I wouldn't get too fixated on the fact that everybody is running on a few sets of APIs. Things will just explode, and
Yeah.
it's the composition of different
Yeah.
things that will. And then there are like companies like Microsoft having their Bings or their words in very like in
Yeah.
other fields. Like I have my protein folding software from the 2000s, right? If that was a thing.
Yeah.
And then, but
Yeah.
now they can kind of make it a lot better with a quantum leap that by using these new technologies. And
Yeah. Yeah.
what will make the difference there is having the users, right? So, for example,
Yeah. So
Microsoft has Microsoft Word everywhere.
yeah.
So the moment something lands in Microsoft Word, then people will have it, right?
Yeah.
By default. So it's
That's
also
right.
that angle is also very interesting.
It's interesting because what you're saying is that it's not really a technical problem right now, right? You said the recipes in there, the recipes in place, the large language models are in place. The cost to entry is basically zero because we can use these large language models and we can just create specific queries and we don't necessarily have to invest a whole lot into it up front. What it's become rather than a technical problem is a basic business problem. What's your market? Who's your audience? How are you going to
Exactly.
get them to use your product?
Yeah.
And it's interesting. So it's like how to have an AI startup right now, 101.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's do
Like
it.
it's very interesting if you can if you go to websites that have prompts and collection of prompts and maybe operations you can do with outputs of language models, you really understand that there's a new, apart from the prompt engineers that you know I've seen job on Twitter and other sources, people posting job ads um, for prompt engineers, paying them like the salary
Hmm.
of a senior staff software engineer, and the
No
thing
way.
said, basic coding skills and experience with prompting, which
Yeah.
is a, a new kind of a new thing, right? So you cannot
I,
have 10 years experience in prompting, right? Um,
I've been doing it since November.
exactly. Whoa, November, good job. you know,
That's right. I'm pretty
I
senior.
have kids like, yes, I want them to learn technology, learn how to
Yeah.
code and so on
Yeah.
eventually.
Yeah.
Um, but the act of coding in the future will be kind of really blurred
Yeah.
in the sense that,
Yeah.
yes, you will need to code, but to build things, you will also need to know this new things and to interact with that. Um, and so I don't know, like the change in the industry is already coming. Like it's not that now coding is not useful anymore. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that the
No.
barrier
No.
for entry for creating products
No.
that are very creative and groundbreaking and so on is a bit lower because it's relatively easier to prompt the model to do very hard things that previously were super hard to achieve and
Yeah.
would result in very clunky experiences. And now you can then unlock that by just learning how this new world works. So I encourage everyone to kind of
Yeah.
go and play with these models and see what you
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
build with them, because it's really like um, a bit transformative in the sense that the sense
Yeah.
of being in front of something that will kind of change the dynamics. And I saw
Yeah.
a thread where there was a guy saying it's the first time after these guys were around, and you would see like the Neanderthal and other like species that got extincted, right?
Yeah.
That Homo sapiens
Yeah.
probably actually killed along the way. But
Yeah.
it's the first time that we can interact with something that is not a human, that we can actually have a conversation with, right?
Yeah.
And it's for sure, I'm not saying that these things have a sense of self or whatever, but the end result doesn't change. It's not so important if they
Yeah. Yeah.
are sentient, and I don't think they are. The point is, what is the effect that they exert in us? Like, I don't know if you are sentient, Josh,
Yeah.
but the effect you
That's
have on
right.
me, right?
Yeah.
It's what I
Yeah.
experience. So at some
That's true.
point, it's
Yeah.
a question of,
Yeah.
like, does that matter so much? And what is the impact of that thing
Yeah.
even existing in the world? So, yeah. So anyway,
So to summarize, so it's time to wrap up for the day.
yep.
But to summarize, it's either either A, start your own AI company right now because the time is right and the cost is low,
Absolutely.
relatively speaking. Or B, make sure you're prompting left and right so you can put that on your resume and you'll get a raise, hopefully, maybe, who knows? I mean, it's got to be the easiest thing ever. I'm going to start doing it. And then three, it's all about your experience and not necessarily on what we define as being sentient or not. It's about what we perceive. And tune in next time. We're going to see how Bing and ChatGPT, if they're still like happily married together in 2 weeks, we'll find out.
I don't know. That's a
So,
long
thanks
time.
again, Luca. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was great.
It's a really long time. All
Nice.
right.
Okay.
Talk to you
Thanks,
later.
Josh. Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.